When people talk about God and Satan, it's usually framed as the ultimate battle between good and evil, light against darkness, the hero against the villain. It's a story so deeply embedded in culture that many accept it without question. But when you pause to think about it, the story doesn't just raise questions, it collapses under its own contradictions. If there's an all-powerful, all-loving God, then why would Satan exist in the first place? Why would an enemy be unleashed at all? And if God is supposed to be stronger, wiser, and perfect, why does this enemy seem to be allowed free rein in the world, causing chaos, pain, and suffering? For centuries, believers have been told that this is part of some cosmic plan. But the truth is, this plan looks a lot like a human-made story, rather than the actions of a perfect being. Think about it. Every culture in history has invented figures that embody evil. The Greeks had Hades, the Persians had Angramenu, ancient Egyptians had Set, and later Christianity shaped Satan into its ultimate villain. It's not that one of these stories is uniquely true, it's that human beings, across time and place, have always explained suffering by creating an enemy, something to blame when life goes wrong. That's the pattern. When crops failed, people said demons had cursed the land. When illness spread, it wasn't bacteria, it was Satan attacking. When doubt entered the mind, it wasn't just natural human questioning, it was the devil whispering. In other words, Satan has always been a placeholder for the things people couldn't explain or didn't want to take responsibility for. And the idea of unleashing an enemy doesn't solve the problem. It creates a bigger one. If God created Satan, then God is responsible for every act of destruction attributed to him. If God allows Satan to run loose, then God is complicit in the suffering that results. You can't claim an all-loving, all-powerful God while also saying an enemy is out there wreaking havoc with divine permission. That contradiction isn't a mystery, it's a flaw in the story. But here's the key point. The real enemy has never been an invisible figure with horns. The real enemy has always been ignorance, fear, and systems that thrive on those fears. When people are convinced that Satan is behind their doubts or struggles, they're easier to control. They're told not to trust their own minds, not to trust evidence, but instead to cling tighter to authority. And that, ironically, is how the idea of the devil has been unleashed most effectively, not on the outside world, but inside human imagination. When you step back and study how the character of Satan developed, the human fingerprints are obvious. The earliest Hebrew scriptures barely mention him. In the book of Job, for example, Satan isn't a fallen angel commanding demons. He's more like a prosecutor in God's court, testing human loyalty. Only later, under Persian influence, does the figure start to evolve into a cosmic adversary. And by the time Christianity took shape, Satan had been transformed into the archenemy of God. But notice something. This evolution wasn't driven by evidence. It was driven by cultural needs, a religion that wants to explain suffering, justify strict rules, and keep followers loyal benefits from having a villain. By externalizing evil, people stop asking tough questions about the system itself. Instead of saying, "Why are these rules so harsh?" they say, "The devil must be tempting me to resist." Instead of asking, "Why did this tragedy happen?" they say, "Satan is attacking us." The figure of the enemy becomes a shield against doubt. Psychologists call this scapegoating. When something goes wrong, humans look for someone to blame. It reduces anxiety by giving suffering a clear cause. But scapegoating also prevents deeper understanding. If a community blames Satan for drought, they won't study irrigation. If they blame demons for disease, they won't investigate hygiene. And that's exactly what history shows. The devil wasn't just an idea. He was an obstacle to progress. And yet, the story of Satan thrives even today. Why? Because it still serves the same psychological and social functions. People find comfort in believing they're caught in a grand cosmic drama. Their struggles feel meaningful if they're framed as battles against an ancient enemy. Leaders find power in reinforcing this drama, because it keeps communities dependent on their guidance, and individuals avoid messy responsibility by saying, "The devil made me do it." But here's the contradiction. If Satan is everywhere, always plotting and deceiving, then God looks weak. If Satan is nowhere, then believers lose their explanation for suffering. The system only works if Satan is both powerful enough to cause chaos and weak enough to be defeated. That tension isn't divine mystery, it's human storytelling. Think about how this plays out in real life. A child is told that their nightmares are Satan trying to scare them. A teenager is told their sexual feelings are the devil tempting them. An adult struggling with depression is told Satan is whispering lies into their mind. None of these explanations help. They only add layers of fear and shame. And the worst part is, they keep people from seeking real solutions. Nightmares are products of the brain sorting through emotions emotions and memories. Sexuality is a natural part of human biology. Depression is linked to genetics, environment, and neurochemistry. None of these need a supernatural villain to explain them. But when people grow up with that framework, they learn to interpret normal human experiences as signs of attack. And once they believe they're under attack, they feel powerless without spiritual weapons. This is where the enemy unleashed narrative causes real harm. People are told to fight Satan with prayer, fasting, or rituals, rather than with therapy, medicine, or evidence-based strategies. They may spend years battling shadows while their real issues remain unaddressed. That's not protection. That's neglect dressed as faith. And on a societal level, the idea of Satan creates division. Groups that disagree are accused of being deceived by the enemy. Political opponents are painted as tools of the devil. Scientific findings that challenge tradition are framed as satanic lies. The concept doesn't just explain suffering, it weaponizes suffering against anyone who dares to think differently. Yet step outside of the religious frame, and the picture becomes clearer. Evil isn't an external enemy unleashed into the world. Evil is what humans are capable of when fear, ignorance, and unchecked power combine. History's worst atrocities weren't carried out by demons. They were carried out by people, often people who thought they were serving God against Satan. The irony is striking. The very idea of Satan as the enemy unleashed has often justified cruelty in the name of fighting him. During witch trials, thousands were tortured and executed because leaders said the devil was at work. During inquisitions, dissenters were silenced or killed for supposedly aiding the enemy. In modern times, entire communities ostracize those who question beliefs, branding them as tools of Satan. This pattern reveals something important. The story of the devil doesn't reduce harm, it multiplies it. The fear of an invisible enemy becomes more dangerous than any enemy itself. And the authority claimed in the name of combating Satan has often unleashed the very destruction it claimed to prevent. Psychologists studying authoritarian systems note that leaders often use an external threat to maintain control. The Cold War had communism. Dictatorships often invent conspiracies. And in religion, Satan serves the same role. As long as people believe an enemy is always out there, they're less likely to question the leaders claiming to protect them. It's not about truth, it's about control. But there's an alternative. Instead of seeing doubt as Satan, we can see it as curiosity. Instead of seeing suffering as demonic, we can study its causes. Instead of seeing morality as obedience in a cosmic battle, we can see it as empathy and responsibility. These perspectives don't require unleashing an enemy. They require facing reality, even when it's uncomfortable. The persistence of the Satan narrative also shows how deeply humans crave meaning. Life is unpredictable, fragile, and often unfair. Framing it as a battlefield between God and Satan gives that chaos a sense of order. You're not just unlucky or facing natural forces. You're a soldier in a grand war. That framing is powerful, but power doesn't make it true, and it comes at a cost. When someone believes every challenge is part of spiritual warfare, they may ignore practical solutions. They may fight phantoms while neglecting the real, tangible causes of their struggles. Worse, they may see those who try to help them with science or evidence as agents of the enemy. That mindset shuts down dialogue and isolates people from real support. But once the narrative is questioned, something shifts. Instead of fear, there's responsibility. Instead of seeing the world as a battlefield, you can see it as a place where choices matter, where human beings shape outcomes through cooperation, knowledge, and compassion. That's not as dramatic as a cosmic war, but it's far more honest. And honesty matters, because the truth is, there's no record of Satan ever acting independently. Every so-called act of the devil has been filtered through human interpretation. It's always someone saying, "This must be Satan." And once you realize that, you see the figure for what it is, not an unleashed enemy, but an unleashed idea. Ideas can be powerful. They can inspire art, literature, and even courage, but they can also spread fear, division, and control. The idea of Satan has done both. It's inspired some of the most vivid works of imagination, and at the same time it's justified centuries of violence and shame. But here's the good news. Ideas can change. Just as people once believed disease came from demons but now understand germs, people can outgrow the need for a cosmic villain. Understanding doesn't diminish mystery, it deepens appreciation. Knowing why storms form or why the mind produces intrusive thoughts doesn't make life less meaningful. It makes life more remarkable. Because it shows that meaning doesn't require enemies, it requires awareness, and awareness is something everyone can cultivate. By looking at evidence, questioning assumptions, and being willing to face uncomfortable truths, people free themselves from the cycle of fear. They stop asking whether Satan is attacking and start asking what's really happening. That shift is liberating, not because it replaces Satan with a new enemy, but because it shows there was never an enemy to begin with, only challenges to understand and overcome. When people let go of the God versus Satan story, they don't lose morality, they gain responsibility. Because without a cosmic scapegoat, the weight of choice rests where it belongs, on human beings. That weight can feel heavy, but it's also empowering. It means we own our mistakes and we own our achievements. Instead of blaming Satan for violence, we can address the social, economic, and psychological causes of violence. Instead of crediting God for kindness, we can celebrate the human capacity for compassion. This perspective doesn't reduce wonder, it grounds it. It shows that the real battlefield is not between invisible beings, but between ignorance and knowledge, cruelty and empathy, apathy and responsibility. And when you see it that way, life looks less like a war zone and more like an open field of possibilities. The enemy isn't unleashed because there is no enemy. There are only human challenges, human choices, and human potential. When the story of God and Satan is presented, it's framed as though it answers the most fundamental questions of human life. Why do we suffer? Why is there evil in the world? Why do we feel torn between good intentions and harmful impulses? But when you analyze the story closely, it doesn't really answer these questions. It repackages them into a drama and then claims the drama itself is the explanation. Take suffering. The traditional answer is that suffering comes from sin, either directly caused by humanity or indirectly through the schemes of Satan. But this explanation quickly falls apart when you look at real examples. Earthquakes don't target the wicked. They hit everyone in their path. Children are born with genetic disorders that have nothing to do with personal sin. Entire species go extinct without ever hearing of God or Satan. These are natural processes, not moral ones. Yet religious frameworks insist on turning them into evidence of a cosmic battle. Now look at human impulses. When someone feels anger, desire, or fear, the framework divides these into categories: holy, human, or demonic. But emotions aren't that simple. Anger can lead to destruction, but it can also fuel justice. Desire can be selfish, but it can also motivate creativity and connection. Fear can paralyze, but it can also protect. By calling one set of impulses God's voice and another set the devil's voice, the framework strips away the nuance and complexity that makes us human. It doesn't help people understand themselves. It forces them into a binary that rarely fits their lived experience. And when it comes to morality, the God versus Satan story often gets in the way. Instead of asking whether an action helps or harms, believers are told to ask whether it aligns with God's will or falls into Satan's trap. That question isn't grounded in reality, it's grounded in interpretation. And interpretation shifts constantly depending on which leader, which denomination, or which scripture passage is emphasized. This creates confusion rather than clarity. The irony is that by making everything about God versus Satan, people actually lose sight of the real causes of evil and suffering. They don't see poverty as the result of economic systems. They see it as a curse. They don't see violence as a product of human choices. They see it as Satan's influence. They don't see natural disasters as geological events. They see them as divine punishment or demonic attack. This framing doesn't just distort reality, it delays solutions. Think about the way this framing affects everyday decision-making. A young person choosing a career might feel passion for science, but if their church teaches that science undermines faith, they're told that their interest is a temptation from the enemy. Another person might feel uncertain about marriage and want to wait, but if their religious leaders say hesitation is the devil planting doubt, they're pressured into choices that may harm them. In both cases, the natural process of weighing options and thinking critically is hijacked by a narrative about unseen forces. This is one of the most damaging effects of the God versus Satan worldview. It doesn't just explain suffering, it assigns invisible motives to ordinary human experiences. And once those motives are accepted, people start questioning themselves instead of questioning the framework. They're told to distrust their own reasoning because the devil can disguise himself as logic. They're told to distrust their own emotions because the heart is deceitful. In short, they're trained to distrust themselves. That kind of training has long-term consequences. Psychologists who study high control groups, often called cults, find that one of the core tactics is teaching members to see their own inner voice as unreliable. Once someone doubts their own mind, they become dependent on the group for guidance. And that dependence feels safe at first, but it comes at the cost of autonomy. The person no longer makes decisions based on their own reasoning, but on the approval of authority. The Satan narrative is especially effective at creating this dependency because it builds fear into the very act of thinking. If questioning is framed as demonic, then curiosity becomes dangerous. If doubt is Satan whispering, then honesty about uncertainty becomes rebellion. This means the only safe path, in the eyes of believers, is to obey, not because obedience makes sense, but because obedience is equated with God's side of the battle. And yet the world outside this framework shows a very different picture. Curiosity isn't destructive. It's the foundation of learning. Doubt isn't betrayal. It's the tool that tests whether beliefs are true. Independent thinking doesn't unleash evil. It uncovers new possibilities. The very traits condemned as satanic are the same traits that have propelled humanity forward. Take medicine as an example. For centuries, diseases were explained as curses or demonic affliction. Questioning that view was risky because it could be seen as undermining faith. But once people dared to ask whether illnesses had natural causes, modern medicine was born. That shift has saved billions of lives. It didn't happen by obeying scripture or fighting invisible enemies. It happened by following curiosity, evidence, and reason. Part 9, Section 3 of 3. Now, consider the problem of accountability. If evil is always explained as the devil's influence, individuals are tempted to shift blame. A violent act becomes the devil made me do it. A harmful choice becomes Satan tempted me. In this way, the enemy isn't just unleashed into the world, he's unleashed as a convenient excuse, and excuses prevent growth. Real accountability means facing the fact that humans are capable of harm on their own. We don't need a supernatural villain to explain why people lie, cheat, or hurt each other. We can look at psychological factors like stress, trauma, or greed. We can look at social factors like inequality, oppression, or injustice. These explanations don't diminish responsibility, they sharpen it. Because if humans cause harm, then humans can also prevent it. Contrast that with crediting good deeds to God. If a person acts with compassion and says, "That was God working through me," they downplay their own agency. But giving credit where it belongs is important. When people see kindness as human, they learn that kindness is within reach of anyone. When they see justice as human, they learn that justice is a choice societies can make. By framing good as God and evil as Satan, the story erases human responsibility for both. And this erasure matters because societies that rely on cosmic explanations often fail to address real problems. If poverty is seen as Satan's attack, then systemic reform is neglected. If violence is seen as demonic, then the roots of conflict remain untouched. If disasters are seen as divine punishment, then prevention measures are ignored. The Satan story doesn't just misdiagnose the problem, it actively blocks solutions. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. The God versus Satan drama isn't about understanding the world, it's about controlling how people interpret the world. By casting every challenge as a spiritual battle, leaders keep followers dependent, fearful, and compliant. And the result is generations of people fighting invisible wars while real, solvable problems go unaddressed. The story of God versus Satan isn't just a set of religious teachings, it's a lens that reshapes how people see themselves and the world. Once someone adopts that lens, everything is filtered through it. A natural disaster is no longer a geological event. It's a battlefield between divine punishment and satanic chaos. A personal setback isn't bad luck or miscalculation. It's the hand of God or the trick of the devil. That lens gives simple answers, but those answers are deceptive. Consider how this plays out in education. A student learning about evolution might be told that the theory isn't science, but a satanic lie designed to pull people away from God. Instead of engaging with evidence, they're told to fear it. That fear doesn't protect them. It narrows their world. It keeps them from seeing how interconnected life is, how adaptation works, and how discoveries in biology improve medicine and agriculture. By labeling knowledge as satanic, the lens of God versus Satan blocks human progress. Or look at relationships. In many traditions, couples are told that conflict in marriage is Satan attacking the bond. But conflict is natural. It comes from differences in perspective, stress, communication gaps. When couples are told to see their struggles as demonic, they may ignore the real issues. They may blame an invisible enemy instead of working on communication, compromise, and growth. The Satan explanation may feel dramatic, but it doesn't solve anything. This lens also affects how communities treat outsiders. If the world is divided into God's side and Satan's side, then anyone who disagrees becomes an enemy. Outsiders aren't seen as people with different experiences. They're seen as agents of the devil. That framing has fueled centuries of persecution, from burning heretics to modern-day conspiracy theories about entire groups being under satanic influence. The enemy isn't just unleashed in myth. It's unleashed in how believers view their neighbors, and it doesn't stop at outsiders. The same suspicion often turns inward. Believers are taught to examine their every thought, asking whether it comes from God or Satan. A kind impulse might be from God. A selfish one might be from Satan. But who decides which is which? Usually it's the leaders, the scripture, or the tradition. The person is trained to distrust themselves and rely on external authority. Over time, this erodes confidence and breeds guilt. Normal human emotions become evidence of demonic influence. Part 10, Section 2 of 3. The psychological toll of this can't be overstated. People raised in environments where every doubt or desire is framed as satanic often grow up with deep anxiety. They're told their thoughts are battlefields, their bodies are corrupt, and their instincts can't be trusted. That message creates an inner split. The person feels like they're constantly at war with themselves. Therapists who work with former believers often hear the same stories. People struggling with obsessive guilt. People who can't make decisions without fearing they're being deceived. People who panic when they feel anger, attraction, or curiosity because those emotions were labeled as satanic. This isn't spiritual growth. It's psychological harm, and it comes directly from the God versus Satan narrative. There's also the issue of resilience. In secular psychology, resilience is built by teaching people how to handle stress, regulate emotions, and problem solve. But in the God versus Satan framework, resilience often means relying on prayer or rituals to fend off attacks. That may give comfort in the moment, but it doesn't build long-term skills. When real challenges come, trauma, loss, systemic injustice, prayer alone can't equip people with the tools they need. They're left vulnerable, believing they're fighting invisible forces while struggling with very real ones. And here's the irony. By making Satan the cause of suffering, the narrative distracts from the true causes. Take poverty. Entire communities are told they're poor because of curses, generational sin, or satanic influence. But the real causes, lack of access to education, unjust economic systems, corruption, go unaddressed. By blaming the devil, the system avoids accountability. And by avoiding accountability, it keeps people trapped. This avoidance plays out globally. In parts of the world, children accused of being possessed are abandoned or abused, not because they actually did anything, but because suffering needed an explanation, and Satan was the easiest one. Meanwhile, the real causes, poverty, illness, lack of education, remain. The enemy isn't unleashed in the form of a demon. It's unleashed in the form of ignorance, weaponized against the vulnerable. The more you examine the narrative, the more you see that it functions like a loop. Evil happens, so people say Satan caused it. They fight Satan with prayer, but when evil still happens, they say it's because Satan is strong. When something good happens, they say God overcame Satan. No matter what the outcome, the story explains it. That means the story can never be proven false. And when something can't be tested or falsified, it stops being an explanation and becomes a shield against questioning. This loop has consequences beyond religion. Conspiracy theories often work the same way. If evidence supports the theory, it's proof. If evidence contradicts it, it's dismissed as part of the cover-up. The Satan narrative is one of the oldest conspiracy theories, framing the entire world as a hidden battle between two forces that can't be measured or proven. And just like modern conspiracies, it isolates people from reality. But reality doesn't need conspiracies to explain it. It needs observation, evidence, and accountability. Earthquakes come from shifting tectonic plates, not demonic rage. Pandemics come from viruses, not Satan's hand. Human cruelty comes from psychology, power, and systems, not invisible whispers. When people face these truths directly, they can work toward real solutions. They can build structures to reduce harm and promote well-being, and that's far more powerful than fighting shadows. What this reveals is that the enemy isn't unleashed in the world by God or Satan. It's unleashed in the stories we tell ourselves. Stories can clarify, but they can also distort. They can inspire courage, but they can also trap people in fear. The God versus Satan story has trapped countless people in fear for centuries, and yet the moment you recognize it as a story, you begin to reclaim freedom.